Tonight we have 6 stories, from a story of a 911 dispatcher, skinwalkers and other cryptids, a stalker, and more. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. You can either submit it at my subreddit r/slumberreads, or my email you can find in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I arrived at the 911 call center at about 6 AM to trade shifts with my friend Caden, who worked the night shift. Thank the Lord, he laughed as I walked through the door. I was about to pass out. I'm so tired, he yelled. A lot of people in the center took the night shift because they say that's when the more interesting calls take place. Me, on the other hand, usually handle the more simpler calls, I guess you could call it, and I like my job that way. Caden took his coffee from his desk, took a sip, and walked out of the center. I sighed and put the headset on and waited. As soon as I heard the phone, I immediately picked it up and answered. 911, what's your emergency? I asked.
My dog's leg is stuck in a fence and it's bleeding really bad.
He sounded like he was a child, maybe 7 or 8.
I don't know who to call.
The kid told me, whimpering. What's your address? I asked him. He told me his address and we figured everything out. Soon, it was rescued and I guess they were fine. About 30 minutes later, I got another call. I grabbed the phone and answered it like usual. 911, what's your emergency? I just heard silence. 911, I said, more angered this time. What is your emergency? The voice on the other line whispered into the phone and replied with,
Too late.
And then he hung up. A few seconds after that call, I got another call. All I heard was screaming, followed with a loud slicing noise and then silence. I held my breath hoping it was just a prank, but I don't think it was. I got on my computer trying to trace the call. Eventually I did, and I figured it came from a secluded forest in Colorado. We got some officers to go out there and check it out. What they found was frightening. It was a single dog with all of its legs chopped off, and a little boy impaled with a stick. Whenever they told me about it, I think I almost pissed my pants whenever I found all of this out. I thought about the earlier call, a little boy and his dog. Another day passes after the incident and I'm at my house. I called in sick, which I never do, to take in everything that happened the previous day. All my thoughts hitting me like a tsunami. I don't know if it was the same boy from the call who killed him. Why did the killer do this? I don't know what happened and I still don't. The days I was taking off work just seemed off. Whenever I left my house, I would find sticky notes on my front door saying things like, too late, and why'd you go? I was completely freaked out, and I didn't leave my house a lot after that. A few days later and I came back to work hoping everything was back to normal, and of course it wasn't. I got a call as soon as I sat down and put on my headset. Of course I answered like always. 911, what's your emergency?
My baby's choking.
What is your address? I could hear wailing and coughing in the background.
My address is...
We'll be there shortly, ma'am. I informed the EMTs and they drove there immediately. I got another call about 45 minutes later. 911, what's your emergency? I said.
Too late.
The man replied. Then he hung up. I traced the call yet again, and it was another forest in Colorado. We had another police squad go down there and found something terrifying. A little baby in his high chair, dead with blood pouring out of his mouth, and other gory details along with an older woman with slit wrists. I quit my job the next day and started working somewhere else. I was scarred in my experience as a 911 dispatcher, and I want to share my story here. Let me tell you, if you decide to be a 911 dispatcher and you're reading this, please reconsider. Okay, so to start out, I live in Mesa, Arizona, which is basically Phoenix, Arizona, because the main cities of Arizona spread out into mini-cities with no border in between. Mesa is what I would call the suburbs of Phoenix. I changed my name, of course. I live in an apartment complex I would describe as close to the ghetto, but still nice. I live in a bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment with my girlfriend. Arizona is a state full of ancient Native American history. The whole place used to be cities of ancient Native Americans. The point is, I'm in the area for what I believe to be a skinwalker. I'll get to my story. Yesterday, I was drinking. One of the things I picked up during the quarantine, and I decided to smoke a bowl on my apartment patio, which I don't usually do, mind you. I just finished loading up my pipe and taking the first hit when I hear a voice somewhere nearby. "Amanda, open the door, please." It was a young, probably in their 20s girl's voice talking, and it sounded calm and teasing. It continued on as I tried to ignore it, smoking my last bud. After about 4 times of it repeating itself, my curiosity caused me to look for the source. I saw an apartment building facing across from the movement. I saw a dog standing on its hind legs, leaning on a door, tapping. At first, I shrugged, of course. Then I hear the voice again. It sounded exactly the same as last time. Exactly the same. As if you recorded their voice and that sentence and replayed it once again. There wasn't any other sound or movement in the complex. I watched the thing knock on Amanda's door for like 30 seconds, in what I would call a state of shock and curiosity. Then it stopped and didn't move for another 20 seconds, until the dog thing stood all the way up, away from the doorway, on its hind legs and turned to face me. It made eye contact with me, which is weird because we were at least 50 yards away. I'm on the 3rd floor. It's on the 2nd. But I felt it looking at me. I held its eye contact. I was so scared. I felt like I should run. Then it got on all 4s and headed down the stairs slowly. At the bottom, it started slowly walking over to me. It was on all 4s now. About to go inside or scream, I don't know. But I had to know what this thing was going to do. It walked close to my balcony. Yes, it was a dog. A brownish, yellow, dirty-looking thing, with big eyes that were 100% attentive to mine. It didn't seem natural, to be honest, but nothing looked wrong at a glance, except that it was staring into my eyes and wouldn't stop. I ran inside as it reached the bottom of my stairs and locked my doors. Soon I heard clawing at my door, doggy clawing. Next, I heard the door handle jiggle. Then it started on my porch door. I of course never answered. Instead, I hid behind the kitchen counter with a knife. After about 30 minutes it left. I stayed up all night, but I didn't see it again, and I didn't go out again. I'm hoping it doesn't come back. I haven't gone outside at night again. I'm burning sage and trying to be as careful as I can. Some friends and I stumbled across a pack which had been left behind in the deepest portion of Pine Hill Cave. It's the sort of isolated, eerie place that makes for a good drinking spot when you're looking to reminisce and try to scare one another. There's enough teenage traffic and college spelunking going in and out of this place that we didn't take the find too seriously at first. We just assumed a group of drunk assholes not too dissimilar from ourselves stumbled off and left it behind. Then, when I rummaged through it at home, I found the old logbook that was stashed away in the frontmost pocket. It was marked as a geological survey log, and most of the pages were records of cave surveys. I'm no geologist, but the information seemed to mostly be about rock layers and formations in local caverns and mines. Very dry and practical. Then, near the end, it suddenly diverges into a sort of journal. I still don't know how seriously to take the record the owner left there, but I've transcribed it here because I found it weirdly captivating. First day. I'm jotting this account down in the hopes it helps me clear my head and keep straight exactly where we have and haven't been. We entered Pine Hill Cave this morning through the only known entrance, about 3 miles east of Mount Vernon, along the railroad tracks bisecting the town. We canvassed the opening string of caverns before making our way down into the lower tunnels, where the cave system opens up and starts to wind. We chose the central path at the fork present on all our maps, the one with the lowest ceiling. and made for the least explored part of the tunnel network. Now, we're about 2 miles crawl away from where we came in. Something happened last night. While Kirk and Alan were asleep, I didn't hear much, just enough to pique my interest. But some kind of rock slide or tremor must have occurred. We woke up to find the low passage back out of the caves blocked by rockfall. We have about 2 days before anyone back at EKU knows we're in trouble, so stress is high. I've kept the others relatively calm, and they're managing well, considering their experience. This is a hell of a first spelunking expedition. I don't know that I'd have stayed as level-headed in their shoes. Though it's a gamble, I'll be taking us further into the tunnels today to see whether the rise some earlier mappers have noted means there's another exit somewhere along this branch of the cave. Well, we could ration our supplies and wait here for a few days, anticipating rescue. The rock shelf that fell in is massive. We'll be stuck in here much longer after anyone finds the collapse and gets around to moving it. Maybe weeks given the cramped scale of the tunnels. With any luck, there's some small cave mouth in the hills above us that no one's ever stumbled across, and we'll push out into the sunlight before anyone even knows we're in trouble. Second day. We worked the rest of the first night to get further into the tunnels. The dry creek bed we've been tracing ended its downward slope around morning, and we've only just reached the last marked cavern on the maps. There's a little pool of water here, clear enough to drink with a bit of filtering in a pinch. The chamber is wide, ringed by forests of columns and stalactites. There's no obvious exit, so I don't know where the speculation about further tunnels comes from. At least we've stretched the amount of time we can survive in here by a respectable amount by finding the pool. We're settling in for an early rest after the hurry and worry over the past couple days. My watch says it should be around dusk on the surface now. We're eating cautiously, making certain we're prepared to make every calorie count if things get tight. Hopefully, it doesn't come down to eating crickets in here. Fourth day. Alan and I crawled back up to the collapse this morning to listen for digging or calls from the other side. We've heard nothing, but it's possible they're just probing the other map tunnels for us before they invest the energy in tearing through the fallen rock. Kirk stayed behind near the pond, sipping some tea we made him on our little camping stove, suffering from a headache. It's possible it's just a sudden drop in food intake, but I'm worried for him. When we got back from the rockfall to check on him and settle in for another night, Kirk swore he heard sniffing, like that of a large dog, coming from the far side of the cavern. He'd scanned the columns around the edges of the clearing, but found nothing there. We couldn't find anything either. I don't know whether the echoes were just playing tricks on his ears down here, or whether the stress is getting to him. Either way, we'll try and stick close together from now on, so no one else has to stew on the situation alone like that again. Fifth day. We decided against another climb to the blockage until tomorrow, at least. We have such limited food looking forward that it'd be best not to waste any more energy on the tough climb than we have to. There's only one place we could be, from a searcher's perspective, and they must know we're here by now, so there's little use in huddling near the collapse just yet. We're just cooking the oatmeal we've got to spare, and talking about what a good adventure story this'll make back at the campus geology department. Trying to keep spirits up. Kirk hasn't done anything to ease my worries about him. He stayed awake all throughout last night, eyes on the far wall of the cave, never giving in to the constant advice on sleep. He's been napping sporadically today. While we're up and about in the cave, whatever he thinks he heard yesterday has really shaken him up. Seventh day. Something's got mad down here. We'd gone up to listen for digging near the collapse, and, having heard a bit of muffled tapping through the rock, returned to the bottom with our spirits up. Hopefully, this meant it was only a matter of time. We were discussing shifting our camp up the creek bed to be closer to the collapse when the electric lantern burnt out. We were more than prepared to lose the battery. We had a few stowed away, anticipating the loss. We all had our flashlights as well, but I'd advised against using them during this involuntary camping trip, since we had no timetable for how long we'd be without natural light in the caverns. When I went into my pack with practiced motions in the inky black to grab the new battery, something happened that I still can't rationalize. Something rushed past me in the dark. It was frightfully fast, and large enough for me to feel the displaced air as it sprinted, but it moved without striking a pebble or scuffing the stone once. Alan cried out, but the calls were muffled almost as soon as they started, with what had to have been practiced precision. I fumbled for my flashlight, the battery for the lantern scattering across the floor as the intruder tore past us, back towards the deepest reaches of the cave. Kirk managed to grab his light first, but by the time its beam found the far wall, we saw only the flash of motion, as Alan was dragged up into the clustered columns and stalactites along the low ceiling, his legs disappearing as the two of us got to our feet and called after him. The whole ordeal, from the dying light to Alan disappearing into the stone, couldn't have taken more than 10 seconds. I knew of nothing agile or quick enough to cover so large a cave in so short a time. I know of nothing big enough to displace air and drag off a grown man like that. Not this deep in a cave system. It took Kirk and I several minutes to actually find the awkward crevice in the ceiling's stony edge, amongst the stalactites where the intruder must have fled to, but by the time we'd struggled up into the little tunnel after Alan, he was long gone. The only sounds haunting the halls of Pine Hill Cave were our own shaky calls, winding off down the unmapped crevice in pursuit of something neither of us could imagine. The only testament to the struggle was a bloody blade of stone, shaped with crude, jagged edges, likely obtained shearing the flint against denser, tougher rock. Away down the bucking and winding little corridor snaked a trail of blood, though it crushes me to write it in such a brutal way. It was far too much to be survivable. This, along with the jabbering wreck Kirk has become, deflated any plans I might have had to attempt a rescue. We've talked it over, and we think our best chance is to fall back to the collapse, our backs to the proverbial wall, and wait there. We'll take all the water we can carry, and keep lights on at all times. Kirk is convinced whatever took Alan is the same thing he heard poking around the stalactites the other day, and I'm inclined to believe that. If that's the case, then the only thing we have in our favor is the flashlights and the lantern. Day 8. We've been up to the collapse through the night and into the morning. The tapping from the other side keeps us from total hopelessness. I've called out a couple times to see if my voice might carry to the searchers, but they've not answered. The noise of the shouting makes Kirk nervous as well, so I've given up trying. I've almost explained that whatever is down here must know exactly where we are, so noise couldn't really hurt the situation, but that would be cruel at this point. Kirk is so close to losing it under the strain, I can't help but feel even more on edge than I already would. He shakes despite the subterranean warmth, and he still refuses to sleep in shifts with me to keep our eyes on the empty creek bed below. I sleep up my uneasy, desperate sleep while he sits quivering, breathing in quick gulps, his eyes seeming pained by the act of blinking. I've been looking over the broken knife, and it worries me how closely it resembles Stone Age tool use. If I didn't know better, I'd say the thing was an old Amerindian weapon, but the material is a strange igneous obsidian. It's from deep down in the crust, far deeper than we are now. The fact that something like this, shaped by hand and gathered miles below the surface, made its way to us here raises too many uncomfortable questions for my liking. All we can do at this point is hope the crew clearing the collapse moves fast. Whatever made this knife almost certainly has more. I've lost track of the days. This will probably be the last entry, as I've been out of food for some time, and I'm down to my last batteries. Whoever finds this, if it gets found, will at least have some idea of what happened in the end. The tapping in the collapse was not coming from a rescue attempt. We lasted another day waiting on them, barely sleeping, and watching the passage back down to the pool like hawks before they broke through. It was quiet, almost silent. Just a scratching of gravel and mud before a big chunk of the collapse went sliding down the creek between us. The things that came through weren't human, though I struggle to place what one could class them as. They were tall, much too tall, and gaunt, flexible in a way that went beyond anything I've ever seen a man do. They moved like snakes, if that makes sense. Probably doesn't. The dark hasn't been too kind to me down here. The faces were just as bad, broad-eyed with mouths that opened far too wide. They had a kind of centipede with them. It was large, the first thing through the gap in the rocks. I think it might have been digging for them. God knows how something like that works. It was the length of a man, pale and troglodytic, but seemed uninterested in us. It was the knife-making things that came hunting for us. Kirk was grabbed before we even knew what was happening. The centipede shocked us so badly, we didn't really react until the things behind it had made it out into the open, and by then, it was too late. They seemed enraged by the flashlights, but they just wrestled with Kirk blind, gashing at him with obsidian blades. It was only chance that set them on him before they got to me. If they had been just a few feet further to their left, when they broke the barrier, Kirk would have been the one shivering in the dark down here, while they did God knows what with me back up there. As it was, I scrambled down the creek with my pack, too terrified to worry about what a cowardly thing I was doing. I didn't think about the fact that I was running further from the only routes I know towards the surface either. Getting away from them was all that mattered. There was another of them in the chamber with the pool, crouched near the water. It may even have been the same one that took Alan. They all look frightfully similar though, so there's no way to tell. Regardless, I was on such an adrenaline spike after the run-in with the things up above that I didn't even stop, just yelled at the top of my lungs as I ran past the pool towards the little passageway further in, swinging the flashlight. Whether I scared it or confused it, I don't know. It slid into the pool and went under, giving me enough time to scramble up into the rearmost tunnels. Then I hurried in and crouched down the path that seemed more open. The ceilings were all low, so the progress wasn't great, but I was locked in an animalistic sort of flight, uncaring where the destination might be, as long as it was farther away from the pale men crawling through the cave back behind me. I hoped, in a dim, malnourished, and petrified way, that I might be able to find some other exit down here, just as we'd originally planned. Maybe I'd smell pine needles or pollen on the wind through some long-forgotten crevice in the forest floor overhead, or spot a distant light in the darkness as the sun scratched its way down to me through the rock and stone. Neither of those things have happened. I scrambled for a long time, down the corridor I initially fled through, and into a deeper complex of tunnels. I tried to be relatively quiet, but I also knew anything adapted for life in a cave system would hear even the slightest scuffle or footfall across the stone, so I never let it slow me more than I could afford. There were splits and fractures in the path, forks in the tunnel system, and I always favored the ones which seemed to lead higher. Failing that, I would take the ones with the highest ceilings. Any minute I can spend on my feet, rather than on my knees is a godsend, even now. About a day into the wandering, I heard strange noises echoing my way up ahead. It was something akin to shouting, but different somehow, as if the vocal cords were dissected or malformed. I doubled back into a tight fissure, which led off to the side of the path I'd been following. That's where I found it. At first, I thought I had found the surface. A sickly, yellowish glow wafted through the little opening. I turned off my flashlight, shocked to see what I took to be the sun after so long. It wasn't the sun. I emerged high up along the side of a massive open space, overlooking the floor far below. The chamber was gigantic, the largest I've ever seen underground, easily the size of a sports stadium. A small waterfall trickled lazily from the jagged ceiling above into a deep sinkhole pool down below, choking the cavern in a warm mist. Along its walls and amongst the stalagmites littering the ground, a sort of pallid golden lichen grew. The luminescent masses of its casting the entire space into dim, otherworldly color. Thousands of marble white crickets crowding the natural roof scared the scene with their chirping song. It was likely much deeper than the deepest mapped reaches of Pine Hill Cave. I can't know for certain, but the rock layering on the walls makes me think that's the case. For all I know, my day spent running through the tunnels was actually many days, and it was all a sort of fever dream episode. The warm mist of the waterfall on my face and the musty smell of the lichen made me think otherwise though. I stayed low, trying to remain silent, hopeful that the noises that scared me out of the main tunnel didn't follow me into the little overhanging on which I stood. I would have nowhere to go if they did. Only after a minute or two in silence did I spot movement along the lower reaches of the cavern's walls, jerking my attention down towards the cave floor. Clambering out of the little alcove in the rock, its entrance seeming too tiny to allow so swollen and unnatural a figure to dwell there, one of the knife-making hunters showed itself, It slid down onto the ground, carrying a dish or a skin to the pool to fetch water. It called out, making hyena-like, guttural noises that sounded almost too brutal for speech to my ears. An answering voice called out in return from across the cavern. Soon, several of the things had crawled from their own clothes in the rock, their elongated limbs scuffling noiselessly along the rocks. They congregated around the pool, broken caricatures of men vocalizing to each other. The longer I watched, the more certain I was that they were speaking. The noises were unnatural, but the cadence and the way pauses and breaks were laced throughout the speech seemed linguistic. I hugged the rock on the tiny platform I rested on for some time, until long after the little group had dispersed. More voices, if they can be considered voices, echoed out to my ears from the crude dwellings in the rock face from time to time. Eventually, needing to be free of that disgusting yellow glow and the otherworldly voices in the cavern, I slunk back into the small tunnel, finding it silent once more. I've wandered for a long while, though I can't know how long. My watch is gone, left on the dry creek bed where Kirk was taken. I found more of the villages, as I've come to think of them, and heard more of the hunters lurching through the tunnels. I've had a few close calls, but I've been fortunate so far. The centipedes are the worst. I think they can smell or hear me better than the hunters, somehow, and they've come crawling for me through the dark several times. I've always gotten away, but the hunters are never far behind. I probably don't have long. I'm going to make for the creek bed again, if I can find it. I'm too deep to find an exit down here, I think. I don't know how I'll be able to avoid being spotted on the climb back out, but it seems better than staying down here, where the things are so plentiful. I'm emptying the pack of everything except this logbook. The food's all but gone anyhow, and I'll need to travel light. If you found this, get out the way you came in. If you can, you aren't alone down here. The bag the log came from was hanging from a jagged stalactite on the ceiling of a little cave with a pool. One we've camped in on short spelunking trips several times. It was hard to see, and it certainly seemed old. We only found it because there were so many crickets making noise in the columns over there that I thought a rattlesnake had somehow meandered down there, and went to check it out. I think the chamber might be the same one the writer is describing as their first campsite, but I can't be sure. I've looked into disappearances associated with the cave, and there are several. There was a pair of sisters who went missing in the late 90s, and a boy whose family lives just up the railroad tracks, assumed to have drowned somewhere inside during a sudden rainstorm a few years back that flooded some of the tunnels. The one that interests me is a group of grad students from Eastern Kentucky University who were lost after entering the cave during a statewide trip to survey Appalachia's caverns in the summer of 1982. There was a small tremor during their time in the cave, and the failure to find them was laid at the feet of rockfalls and disturbed earth. They are assumed dead, and none of them have resurfaced. Two of the first names match the two mentioned in the logbook. I'm considering trying to look further into this, to try and discern whether or not this is some kind of elaborate fiction exercise, taking cues from obscure old news stories that's somehow conducted to spook the hell out of wandering teenagers in the cave. It bothers me, though, that the backpack was hanging next to a small gap in the cave ceiling near the pool, almost invisible through the stalactites. I can't help but think it seems horribly similar to the one mentioned in the logbook. I know this is going to sound fake. It feels like this is one of the stories that only people who have similar experiences ever truly understand what I'm getting at. People from cities are always first to tear me down, and those in busting suburbs laugh it off. I'm being serious, and it seriously scares me. Well, first I should explain that I live in the middle of nowhere. It's one of those places where we get excited when there's a bad pileup on the interstate, or a house fire because it means we will have something new to talk about for the week to come. We talked about our new Taco Bell for an entire month when it finally opened. We might honestly have a higher cow population than a human population in my entire county, and this is a recipe for an everybody knows everybody community. That being said, there is one high school and one middle school for my entire county. My graduating class was 128 people. Maybe we pay more attention to stuff like this because we are so small, but in the end, it just never seems right. When I tell other people, they like to think I am exaggerating, or that I get my dates mixed up, or that I'm just flat out lying. I wish I was, because then I would feel comfortable living here. When kids move up to our old, prison-like middle school, we're told that someone aged 12 to 18 dies every year. It's not our choice who. The death won't be pretty. We'll mourn for a month, wear our brightly colored plastic remembrance bracelets until they break or we lose them, and thank whatever force we believe in that it wasn't us. It sounds like a bad prank to scare the new kids, and it kept sounding like that until it happened. To be honest, I don't remember who it was my 6th grade year. All I remember was that it was a senior who was so close to graduating. My 7th grade year, it was a 10th grader who had a sudden brain aneurysm while at football practice and died before he made it to the hospital. All of his closest friends saw it happen. He was supposed to be the star player with a bright future. He's only so memorable to me because he quickly had a scholarship made in his name. My 8th grade year was as a girl in the class under us. She had a sudden asthma attack in the middle of class and was sent to the hospital. We were hopeful for her recovery when she started Snapchatting from her hospital room, and then the next day she was suddenly gone. We were never really told what happened to her. I don't remember who, but in 9th grade, I know it was some sort of car crash. 10th grade hit home especially hard for me, because the boy who was taken had been a close acquaintance of mine up until that point. I hadn't known anyone who had passed. His friends say that they were having fun playing basketball like they always did, and then suddenly the victim started hyperventilating and he quickly passed out. We were told his death was a freak accident, but we were never given a definite reason about why a perfectly healthy 15-year-old with no previous health conditions would just drop like a fly. By 11th grade, most of us were numb to the fear. Again, I don't remember exactly who, but that year, it was a middle schooler. Senior year, another kid who I think was a 10th grader inexplicably passed out on the bus on his way home from school and never woke up. Then I graduated, found a university that made and still makes me more than happy, and left it all behind me like all of us tend to do. Graduation is our rite of passage from whatever curse haunts our school. Once we are out, it's like we're granted immunity. We don't look back. We don't question everything that happened or the lives we lost, and we hope that the next generation makes it out okay. I wish this stopped here, but it doesn't. Having been through it all, I kind of used the story as one of those introductory tales of woe to make interesting conversation with people I wanted to be friends with. Most people jokingly play along as if they know what I've been through, poke fun at what I say, and then forget it ever happened. That wasn't until I met my roommate this year, a person who also comes from a rather small town and also doesn't question the weird things that go bump in the night. They have their own personal stories, which could be a threat of its own, and we have a habit of digging at each other for more details, because the longer you think about it, the worse it gets. It was because of those late night discussions about what was wrong with our lives that I was able to connect more eerie dots. Like how those who move away from my county before graduating almost always die tragically, either their junior or senior year of high school, and almost always because of a car crash. I know of 3 people who were supposed to graduate at the same time as me, who died because of car crashes in the 3 months leading up to graduation. All 3 of them had moved away from my county at various times in their lives. I had almost jokingly brought this up to a cousin who has lived in this county for much longer than I, and also went through the same school system I had gone through, but she was very serious when she agreed with me, and listed off names of people who she knew also died in car crashes after moving away. However, one of the people she listed had drowned. I regret not asking about whether or not he could drive in the first place, but I didn't want to stroke the fire anymore, and the somber mood was almost suffocating. My second connection was that whatever is happening, whether it is a curse or just some freak coincidence, almost seems to target generational families. My county is old, like being around since the founding of the settlements of this country old. We have a lot of history, and some of the families here can trace their lineage all the way back to when the county was made. Those are the families who are the worst off. They can't make it through a generation without 1 or 2 tragic deaths. Any family who stays here for longer than 2 generations is putting their children at a higher risk of dying. Some research shows that there have been witch trials where my county is. Some records say in the county, and some say adjacent to it. We may also be on American Indian territory, no surprise there. My roommate did some digging and found death records of tragic young deaths dating back to the mid-1800s. The most memorable to me was the boy who got his head shot off in a freak hunting accident. I'm not the strongest believer in the paranormal, and I don't want to accredit all of this to something supernatural, but the fact of it is that I don't know what's happening. I don't have the answers I desire. Things just seem too connected to feel coincidental, and the fear of the unknown eats away at me sometimes when I think about it too hard. I don't know if anyone will actually spend the time to read this, but I guess I just want some sort of validation. I want someone to know what I'm talking about, or I want someone to have an explanation. I don't even mind someone completely tearing me down with logic if it means I can get an answer. Until then, I'll try not to think too hard about it. After all, ignorance is bliss. My name is Edward Scott. I'm a police officer with the Pittsburgh Bureau of Police, 11th Precinct. What you are about to read was transcribed from a journal that was found at the scene of a grisly murder that took place on April 9th, 2020. Man and a woman, mid-50s. Rest assured that the perpetrator has been caught and is sitting in a holding cell. He clearly is insane, and I believe this account will show that. I hope he gets the help he so desperately needs and needed. I found myself standing in the driveway of my house, looking at the backyard. There's a large maple tree that's been there since my parents moved in, and a chain link fence that separates our garden from our neighbors. Then it hit me. There was something behind me, running at me. But I hadn't the bravery or courage to look behind me, even as the footsteps gradually got more and more rapid, running up my hilly street. I knew I had to do one thing: run. I bolted up the sidewalk and up to the back porch and tried desperately to get the door open, but it's like something was holding it shut on the other side. Because I was able to open it for a brief moment, but it shut quickly. I could hear the creature getting closer. Its pace had slowed, but it was in the driveway, searching. By some miracle, I managed to finally get the door open and stumbled into the kitchen. I locked the screen door and slammed the door shut and got a brief glimpse of it. It was short but crawled on all fours, with a ferocious speed and an unnatural face. It was like something I'd drawn from a nightmare as a kid. But the locked door didn't make me feel much safer, because I knew this creature would easily just break in through a window. But I needed something to defend myself with, so I grabbed the sharpest kitchen knife my dad had in one of the drawers. But that's another thing that disturbed me. I didn't hear my parents. Both of their cars were in the driveway. I yelled and screamed for them but got no response. Actually, that's not true. The creature made a high-pitched screech, like that of an elk bugle, and then another one. There had to be at least 2 now. In the pitch black, I fumbled my way up the stairs and immediately checked both of the bedrooms, but found them empty. Beds made perfectly. It's like they went on vacation and didn't tell me, but then I remembered where my dad put his pistol. He taught me how to shoot when I was 16, under the vanity mirror. And there it sat wrapped in a hand towel, and 2 boxes of bullets in the drawer above it. Just as I loaded the magazine in, I heard the distinct sound of a door opening, not being kicked open, but as if someone had a key. As if they had a key. They were inside, and they both slowly made their way up the stairs. I barricaded my bedroom door by moving my trunk that contained all of my childhood toys and video games to prepare for a last stand. I took shelter in the closet and took out my phone and dialed 911, screaming and cursing at these things until my throat hurt. The operator almost made me sound like a liar because of how I described what I saw and what was coming for me, but I knew what it was. I knew it didn't matter much, but I decided to try and keep quiet as a last hopeful attempt. The creatures wailed and pounded on the door like their lives depended on it. Just as I had repeated what the creatures looked like again, they managed to finally move the trunk. One had stumbled over it and fell to the ground, while the other walked in behind it. It wouldn't be long now. I took the safety off of the handgun and, probably having poor aim, pointed it at the door. I could see the shadows of their unnatural feet standing in the tiny shimmer of light, illuminating them from the streetlight outside. My fingers slowly moved to the trigger. The door flung open. I closed my eyes and fired wildly, screaming at the top of my lungs, hoping to hit something, but knowing I'd probably be dead. Except I wasn't. I could hear the clicks of the empty handgun as I kept pressing the trigger over and over again. I opened one eye and all I saw was red, pools of blood spilling into the wooden closet floor. As I slowly moved my gaze up, I saw them both, limp. I couldn't stand to look at their faces because of how hideous they were, but one of them said something. It said my name. With its dying breath, it uttered nothing more than my name. I cried for what felt like ages, but knew I was finally safe. But I knew the police would ask questions once they got here, so I grabbed a notebook from my desk and decided to write this account as I guess some sort of self-defense explanation. I see the red and blue lights outside now. Finally, this can be all over. But as I look back, I keep seeing the distinct faces of two people I recognize in the creatures. Their faces look like my parents, but they usually text before coming home from their evening walk. He stood alone, a dark silhouette against the streetlights, an unmoving centurion of the night. Ever since my first night in this apartment, he had been waiting. 2 weeks ago, my life was a mess. A bad breakup with a good woman who had left me disheveled in both appearance and at heart. But growing up, I had the mantra, boys are tough, keep fighting, beaten into me by a variety of relatives. I quickly found a small apartment in the local newspaper, a charming one-bedroom abode with oak beams running the ceiling's length, and a black iron wooden stove to warm me in the deepest of winters. I counted myself lucky on many levels for finding this place. Any longer sofa surfing would lead me to a soup kitchen eventually. Above all else, the location was perfect on the west side of Lylhurst, close to my job at the steelworks. I had finished unpacking, and I felt I had earned some kind of special treat, so called for a pizza takeout. As I waited for my food, I busied myself with fiddling around the place, adding the final touches to my new home. I remember now in retrospect, the feeling of being watched. At the time, I merely shrugged the feeling as a paranoia in a new place. I looked out the window, down into the car park. My impatience matched my hunger, and I noticed him. A man, I presumed, stood under the branches of a large evergreen. Its lowest branches grew out long and full. I couldn't make out his features or even the color of his clothing, but he installed a feeling of dread in me. I thought to myself he must be a dog walker or something, trying hard to rationalize his very existence. Alas, I could not. I could feel his unseen eyes boring into my own. The dread was rising in me fast. I moved away from the window, closing the blinds in a panic. Sitting on the sofa, my thoughts raced through scenes of horror movies. I mean, this is how they all start. Slowly, my logical mind broke through the turbulence of fear and paranoid thoughts. He's probably just someone enjoying the nice night, a stargazer of sorts. I tried hard to believe my own words, but my gut feeling said otherwise. A sudden banging drew me from my thoughtful abyss. Shit, I cried aloud. Standing up, my knees began to knock slightly, edging my way forward to the door. "Pizza guy?" came a voice from the other side of the wooden door. In all my fear and panic, I had forgot about the pizza. "One moment," I shouted, fumbling through a 20 to pay. I wrenched open the door, and before me stood a young man of around 20. His black jacket and cap bore the pizzeria logo. In his hands, a large red pizza box. I smiled at him, almost too happy to see him. He must have thought I was stoned. I handed the money over and was about to close the door when a question came out of my mouth involuntarily. "Hey, did you happen to see anybody standing outside?" I quizzed the lad. No?" He replied with a look of uncertainty. "I mean, not that I noticed anyway." He looked at me oddly as I sighed in relief. "Yeah, cool. I just thought... Never mind. Have a good night." I decided against spouting off on a delirious rant about a man in the dark. It would most likely end in a trip to a padded cell in Lylhurst Institute for the insane. I closed the door, locked it, and made sure the deadbolt was in place. I now turned my attention to the 14-inch pepperoni pizza. I found the TV remote, turned it on. News, soap operas, A film about a bald man shooting people, all flicked past my eyes with each button press. I settled on watching the cartoons. I needed the colors and childish humor to bring me back from my dark thoughts of the night. 11 p.m. came around, and I began to feel tired. The pizza had given me that sleepy haze often induced by large meals. Turning off the lights, I grabbed a blanket and settled onto the sofa. My bed had yet to arrive, and the sofa was looking more comfortable than the cold floor in my bedroom. I turned the TV down and found myself enjoying the crappy reality show on it. Under my blanket, I began to get too hot because the room was stuffy. I could never sleep in a warm room. Even as a child, I always had my window wide open. I slouched off the sofa and half crawled to the window, pulling up the blinds and unlatched my window. I sat for a moment and breathed in the cold, crisp air of the night. It was refreshing to feel the gentle breeze on my face. I closed my eyes to appreciate the moment. Nothing beats that feeling when you are too hot, to then feel a cold breeze dancing around you. As I opened my eyes, I happened to glance down at the evergreen. My heart launched in my chest. He was there, still there. The man. He was stood in the exact position from hours ago. He looked as if he hadn't even moved. The pure terror from before resurfaced violently, like a shark coming from the depths to attack a swimmer. I shrunk away from the window. I could not rationally explain why I was so scared. He had done nothing in the way to threaten me. In fact, he had done nothing at all. Maybe it was the primordial fear of the unknown, passed down the generations in the architecture of our DNA. Yeah, I thought. It was the unknown aspect of the situation that gave the fear. Maybe the influence of pop culture horror too. Finding my courage, I stood back up to face the unknown watcher, but he was gone. The place his silhouette had haunted now lay bare. He must be finished stargazing or whatever reason he had to be there. Retreating to the sofa, I pulled the blankets up higher than normal, like a child haunted by the scary stories told by mischievous family members. I resolved to get some sleep. I had a busy day ahead of me. As I lay there, I began a mental checklist of jobs for the next day. I was back at work in a day, so it was important I sorted what needed to be sorted. As hard as I tried, the man kept perforating my subconscious mind. Faceless and evil, he followed me to my dreams. The next day, a storm had blown in from the north. Its cold grip held Rylhstories tightly. I woke early from a disturbed sleep, feeling uneasy from the previous night's happenings. I switched on the coffee pot and took a shower. Coffee in hand, I sat down, writing out my job list on some paper. First stop was a hardware store, and then onto a grocery store, then the cemetery. It was coming up to the 15th of May, the anniversary of my mother's death. Though my childhood had been swathed in abuse from some relatives, my mother had always been kind to me. She had raised me the best she could, and tried to protect me from my father's drunken abuse. Often she herself had been the receiver of such violence that I, or more times than I care to remember, believed her dead. She had been a beautiful soul, and taken from me far too soon. 5 years had passed. The pain had of course gotten easier to carry, but at the beginning, it had destroyed my world. At around 10 a.m., I found myself looking at the wide selection of tools in the town's DIY store. I selected a few items, including a rather big wrench. I had no real need for such a monster tool, other than to crack the skull of a hypothetical burglar. I paid and left, heading downriver towards the grocer's. After eating my greasy pizza the night before, I felt I needed some sort of nutritious food. I settled for a pasta salad with chicken and ranch dressing. Before going to the counter, I grabbed a 6-pack of ales. I wanted to celebrate moving in, even if it was a one-man party. Near the counter, I found a rather beautiful bunch of flowers. They reminded me of the ones my mother grew in the garden growing up. The checkout girl was pretty. Brown hair hung to her shoulders. Deep blue eyes set like jewels on her face. A kind smile greeted me. I smiled back in a dorky, awkward manner. We exchanged pleasantries and I left the store. I looked towards the town square, watching the people of Rylhstories go about their business. I set off a brisk pace toward the cemetery. Rylhstories Cemetery started as a burial ground after the Civil War. Many soldiers were buried there in mass graves. Every so often one was found by a unsuspecting landscaper or gravedigger. Usually it would then be excavated and the inhabitants relocated to a new grave with a cross to honor their efforts and existence. My mother had bought 5 plots when her mother died. After she passed, she was put next to Grandma. 3 plots remained, and every time I came here, they reminded me of my own mortality. One day, I too would lay in the hollowed ground alongside my grandma and mother. I placed the flowers in the sunken vase in front of the tombstone, removing bits of litter and debris from the trees. "Hello, Mom," I spoke softly. As though she was alive at my front door, I sat for a while on the bench next to her grave and spoke to her picture from the wallet. Though from the outside, I must look crazy, this was rather therapeutic for me. I could tell her all of the happenings of my life, like I always had done. I had been here 2 weeks ago after my breakup with Jen. I had spoken to my mother that time, and when I left, I felt better in a small way. By the time I had finished, it was getting dark. As I closed the iron gates of the cemetery, I looked up at the sky. The shades of pink and red made for a pretty scene, especially stretched over the landscape that surrounds Rylhurst. I made my way back home. The car park came into sight first, then the evergreen. I shuddered at the sight of it. But tonight there was no watcher, or as my mischievous mind put it, no axe murderer. I got to the front door and unlocked it, stepping into my hallway. Jack had hung up, and it was definitely time for a coffee. I looked at the new tools I had bought, a shiny hammer with a leather handle, a set of screwdrivers, and finally the big wrench. My groceries were stowed in their various homes in the kitchen, and I sat down to eat the pasta salad. I turned the TV on, and decided on the news tonight. See what's going on in the world. The usual baits of prejudice for the racially motivated demographic. Half stories reported by interns and boring sports commentary. That was a big bust, I mused. Flicking around, I found some old detective show and found that more to my liking. Engrossed in the story, I went to take a sip of water to find it empty. Cursing my stupidity, I got up to refill my glass. As I walked past the window, something caught my eye. By the evergreen. The watcher. My eyes widened and I stood transfixed like a deer caught in the headlights. What the hell? I murmured slowly. My heart was pounding again and I could feel the anxiety building. That was it. I'm not being made to feel scared in my own home, I thought. I had enough of that as a kid. I walked to the window and wrenched it open. Taking a deep breath, I yelled, "Hey, you down there. Stop standing in the shadows and go away. If you don't, I'll call the cops, you freak." That'll show him, I thought. The stranger didn't move, nor did he yell back. Instead, my ears picked up a low, guttering laugh. And as it grew louder, my face reddened. "I told you, just screw off," I yelled even louder, trying to make my voice somewhat deeper and more intimidating. The laughter stopped. Silence hung in the air where it had been. The watcher made a movement, a step, backwards, and was gone from my sight. I waited in case he reappeared, but he didn't. "Got the message then, creep," I said to myself. The petty triumph over my fear felt like a war had been won. I returned to the sofa and watched the rest of my show. 2 weeks later, and my apartment was looking like a real adult's home. I had books on shelves, pictures on walls, and even stretched to buying a throw for the sofa. The watcher had been absent from the evergreen for 2 weeks, but not my dreams. Every night since my ballsy shouting, he had materialized in my subconscious as a malevolent specter, haunting the fringes of reality. This didn't truly affect me. It made sleeping less enjoyable, but not so much that I couldn't sleep. One Saturday morning, I found myself eating breakfast in a cafe on the old Market Street of Rylhurst. There were many folks about, eating plenty and drinking coffee. I'd all but forgotten about the unwanted watcher for 2 weeks prior. And there, I sat without a care in the world. I got up to go pay. The counter was a big wooden one, various cake and sandwiches on display, and a coffee machine stood on the side. The wall behind was covered in a mirror. I caught a glimpse of myself. Ugly bastard, you, I thought. As I paid, I looked back up to my reflection. Over my right shoulder, I could see out of the door into the square. Stood in the middle, near a bench, was a man dressed in a black coat and ragged jeans. Caught my attention. Because I had his full attention, he stood staring at me. No, I thought. He's at least 100 yards away. I'm in a building. can't see me. My optimism was completely false. I forced a smile at the cashier and made my exit. Outside, I looked around, but the man was gone. Literally nowhere to be seen. Maybe he had been a figment of my imagination. I decided to walk down to the library, hoping to find a good book to lose myself in. Back at the apartment, I had settled into a book about the occult, a study of demons and such. The dark lure of magic and demonic entities had always interested me. The stories of ancient mages and medieval witch cults. For my dinner, I made a burger and fries micro meal. The extent of my culinary skills. I sat by the window and looked out across Alahurst at night. The dark trees of the surrounding woodlands swayed in the chilly air. Smoke rose up from various houses in the distance. I looked down at the car park, inspecting my black Volvo estate. It was an older model, but ran like a dream. Good mileage and fuel usage. In my peripheral vision, I caught a slight movement to my right, at the evergreen. My eyes started to focus on the source. Nothing. Must have been a rodent of sorts. My eyes picked up movement again. I looked at the ground 5 feet to the right of the tree, and seen the expected horror of a black silhouette against the light of the street lamp. The fear in me rose, but so did the anger. How dare this creep stand there again? I raged as I opened the door. I told you the other week. Screw off or the police are getting involved. The figure made no indication that I'd heard him. But then suddenly out of the silent darkness came a gnarled voice that seemed to float on its own evil wave. No, but I do hope you enjoyed that drink today, it said. I reeled in horror. The men in black had been a real presence outside the cafe. I shrank back from the window. My hand rested on the hammer I bought earlier. See you soon, the stranger called out to me. His sinister tone chilled my bones. I slammed the window shut. I cursed my situation as I grabbed my phone. The police were the only option here. A crazy dude stands outside my building all night. I dialed in 911.
911, what's your emergency?
I took a breath and said, "Please." A connecting tone broke through the receiver.
Police?
Hello? I have a problem. My voice shook.
Yes?
It would seem I have a fellow staring up at my window every night, just stands in the shadows. I spoke to him once and he laughed. He was even stood outside the cafe I visited the other day. I sounded frantic even to myself.
We can send out a notice to officers in your area. Call back if the situation escalates.
Came the confident response of the dispatcher. I thanked him and hung up. I checked the window and seen the man was still there. He was stood looking up at the apartment. I still couldn't work out his face or any features. He was still the silhouette in the night. Shortly the wave of relief washed over me. Blue flashing lights came from the left side of me into the car park. I watched in disbelief as they stopped in the car park, got out, and flashed a torch around a couple of times, and got back in the cruiser. My phone rang. I looked the unknown number and prepared my complaint about the 2 donut chasers below me. Hello? I shook as I spoke.
Good evening.
A growl on the other side spoke back. Is this an officer from the car park? I asked.
This is someone from the car park, yeah. I just need to know what number you are in, sir.
The man said. I was just about to reply when fear struck again. There was no blue light illuminating my wall or window panes. Before the blue had bled over every reflective surface. I peered out of the window to see there was no longer a police cruiser down on the concrete. What do you want? I demanded, my voice now shaking as much as my hands.
I know who you really are.
A low, guttural laugh rang out my phone, its mocking tones crushing my last shred of hope. Smart one. Well, I won't mess around anymore. I'm coming. A mocking voice retorted.
See you soon.
I slammed my phone down, calling 911. I began to frantically explain to the dispatcher what was going on. Halfway through my pleading rant, the ominous tone cut through the call. The line was dead. I tried again. The tone rang back at me, almost sneering at me. I slammed the phone down and picked my new hammer up. The handle felt good in my hands. The $19.99 price tag, still attached by a plastic loop, hung on the shaft. I swung it around. If I had to protect myself, I would. I walked to the kitchen counter and took a swig from the bottle of scotch, Dutch Courage. I sat and waited for eternity. My ears strained to pick up the smallest sound. Somewhere, a neighbor was playing music. The bass made its way to my ears. I pushed it aside and focused deeper into the wall of sound emitted from multiple apartments. A shrill shriek cut through the hum of regular noises. I jumped up and readied myself. Breathing deeply, I advanced to the hallway. Stomping boots could be heard getting louder by the second. The wind outside had picked up, the droning noise and rustling trees. I was stood near the door when I heard it. A wheezing, gravely breathing. A wheezing, gravelly breathing. The floor creaked slightly under me. I mouthed a curse at the unwanted creak. The guttural laugh mocked me from beyond the thin wooden door. "I hear you," said the assailant, the words spoken in a drawn-out sadistic fashion. "You won't get away from me, son. I just need some company." It continued. I shuddered at the word company, sick images of being murdered by some twisted silhouette. "Police are on the way again," I bluffed. "And I have a gun." "A gun?" called out the voice. "Yeah, a big gun. And if you don't leave me be, I'll blast your head off." My voice faltered as I lied. I heard a metallic click and the voice said, "Like this?" A boom of a gun came from the other side. I jumped away in fear. Looking back at the door, I noticed a few holes around a blast center. The hole gave me a brief view of a black jacket. It moved slightly to the left. Suddenly, I found myself staring at a pair of black eyes, surrounded by scarred skin that stretched and blistered over its skull. His mouth was just visible. It too stretched into a sinister smile. "Hello," he said. I ran, dived into the lounge. I flung myself into the big cabinet that was used for jackets and bits of crap I had long forgotten. As I shut the door, a banging, cracking noise signaled my front door had given way. I held my breath, shaking. My right hand was gripped on something hard. The hammer? No, I had dropped that in the hallway after the gunshot. No, it felt like the handle of my baseball bat, a relic of a phase I went through, determined to get into a sport to get fitter. Cake and chocolate had seen an end to that before it even made a difference. I gripped it tight and brought it up to my chest, ready to swing at the man. That's if he didn't shoot me. The lounge door slowly opened, interrupting my train of thought. A middle-aged man dressed in black, dirty clothing torn in places, walked into the room. He was holding a sawed-off shotgun. It looked dirty and old. I pressed my eye to the gap. The man looked around, and his cold black eyes settled on my refuge. He moved towards the door. Panicking silently, I needed a plan. He was by the sofa, 8 feet away. In 10 seconds, I'd probably be dead. 6 feet. I had to do something. Smash the door open. 4 feet. Jump out and hit him with the bat. 2 feet. React. I smashed hard on the door. It swung into the man and gunned hard. The impact had made its trigger finger slip, and the second barrel went off. I had no other choice. I had to kill him. I swung the aluminum-plated bat down hard. Each swing landed on his upper body. I could hear the thump of each swing. The bat must have made impact with his skull because the sound of skull cracking egged me on harder. A primal scream had filled my head, and the sight of the creep's blood fed an insatiable appetite to live. The minutes had dragged by during the struggle. I hadn't stopped until I knew he was dead. A sizable pool of blood saturated the carpet around him. His mutilated face and head, swollen and bloody. The black eye stared up at me from the eternal abyss. I dropped to the sofa crying and shaking. Shock took me and I felt empty to the world around me. Sometime later, the police had cordoned off my apartment. CSI investigators combed through the scene for several hours. Regular uniforms asked me to recount the twisted tale numerous times, often asking changing questions to possibly catch me out. Finally satisfied, they told me they would be in touch. When I was allowed back into my apartment, I was shocked to see the blood still soaked into my carpet. The body was long gone to the examiner's office. I decided to call the landlord in the morning. He would have to fit a new carpet. I sat by the window, staring out to space. Lights danced in my line of vision, blurred orbs in the distance. I had gone to the 24-hour place a while ago and bought a 6-pack of beer and 20 cigarettes. I hadn't smoked in 10 years, but if there was ever a good time to smoke, it was now. I finished a smoke and opened the window to flick out the ember. I watched it fall, tumbling in midair. The ember burnt up as it hit the ground, and I noticed it landed a few meters away from the cursed evergreen. I looked at the top of the tree, swayed in the gentle breeze left over from the winds of earlier. My eyes dropped their gaze down the length of the tree till I reached the bottom. My heart stopped. I ran cold. There he stood, the Watcher, the Centurion of Nightmares, unchanged, undead. He stepped forwards into the light of the car park. He stood up and stared at me, transfixed in the window. Transfixed in the window. That slow, spreading, sinister smile ran from cheek to cheek. I cried aloud and looked about me. There was nothing I could do. He stood for a minute, smiling demonically, then turned on his heel and began to meander through the bushes into the darkness where he belongs. 6 weeks passed me by. I lost my job soon after the incident of that night. I was too scared to leave my apartment most days, and when I did, I was a mess. I would jump as a door opened or somebody spoke behind me. I even struggled with people smiling. In every smile, I could see that same sinister, stretched smile of the stranger. I called the police about him and they gave me all the details of the man on their records. Even told me where he had been cremated. But I know their John Doe and my monster are the same. I just can't explain how. Most nights he leaves me be, letting me rot and vegetate alone in my misery and paranoia. Some nights he stops by, smiling and watching my paralysis develop as I squirm under the devilish eyes. I know one day he will come back for me and collect me. Maybe he is death or the devil. All I know is he is attached to me by a bond stronger than stone, a bond of predator and prey. And there he is again, smiling, waiting.